as everybody documented, knows it was a beautiful day. It was a great morning, beautiful sky. And I was in the office of the state FMBA. I was the firefighters president at the time for the state of New Jersey, Firemen's Mutual Benevolent Association. And we were in the office. I remember Larry Petrillo, who went on to be the state fire marshal. And we were in the office and somebody said, turn on the TV. And that's when we first, we saw, I guess it was a replay of the first plane hitting the towers. Now, what was memorable about that, besides that, was his wife worked for the Security Exchange Commission, and she was underneath all of this. So I, like everybody else, we thought maybe it was, just a plane that was out of its airspace and a small plane that happened to hit it, like, a plane had hit the Empire State Building a while back. And then we watched the second plane hit and realized that this was something different, and we started to get the report. So I went home and, got my stuff together, knowing that I would probably have to respond. Didn't really know exactly what to do, but my wife had gotten my two daughters out of school, and I remember saying goodbye to them and wondering, hey, are we ever going to see these kids again, And so there's a lot of stuff going on, but the adrenaline is going. I went into the Elizabeth Fire Department and met up with, there was a Deputy Chief, John Sires, and he decided that, we weren't going to wait for the mutual aid call, but he and I would drive over. So we went over through Staten Island and kind of teamed up with a bunch of other New Jersey assembling. And the whole time we wound up in Red Hook, Brooklyn is where they brought us to. And we, you could hear the jets flying overhead and, kind of controlling the airspace. And then we got reports of Washington and the planes that there. So we're wondering, like, this is, the country's at full-blown war. So our job there was to, I'm on the phone trying to, connect with some folks with my job as the state union president. But New York, the largest fire department in the world, has never before this ever needed or required any mutual aid. They're always the givers of mutual aid. So this was a unique thing that we would be in a firehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn. So I was assigned there, and a couple of things that I remember was the firefighters that were there from New York, FDNY, who were kind of assigned to ride with us, because there were other incidents going on at the same time. There were still fires, there were still smoke calls, there were medical calls in Brooklyn and other parts of the city that had to be covered. So while they're kind of riding shotgun with us, they became more and more frustrated, because in the fire service, the rule is, we bring our own home, nobody left behind. And so they wanted to go to the pile or ground zero, and more they would see people from out of town, or from, eventually there were folks from different departments even around the country. And they become more and more frustrated at why, the anger, why aren't we there, getting our folks, why am I assigned here? And the other thing is, as the day went on and you watched the horror, and we knew when the towers came down, we knew where the firefighters were. And there were, I want to say, somewhere between 9 and 11 firefighters that were assigned who responded from that house. And while some folks were bringing food and supplies, and there was more food in that firehouse that day than you can imagine, but family members started showing up, wives, fathers, girlfriends, sons, daughters, inquiring about, the firefighters who had left from, and as the day went on, because there were guys who responded, as it turned out, who were worked the night before, but were hanging around were probably having coffee or breakfast or whatever, and they jumped on and decided to respond as well. So we knew pretty much, or we were hoping, but in the heart of hearts, we knew that this wasn't going to be good news to share with these families. And so in that night, the news just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Things started to develop as to that this was a terrorist act and the information. Meanwhile, we were responding to calls for, careless cooking or, false alarms. There was also many other calls and chaos. The one thing that became clear was that the titular head of the fire service in New York had been cut off. Like almost every, director or the chiefs and so many of the command had been taken out and had been killed when the towers came down because they were set up. Thus, the change in approach to firefighting in a high rise ever since then. So then thinking about my family and wondering if you'd ever see him again, how long we would stay there. The next morning, we were allowed to actually go over to Ground Zero, or the pile as it was known. And I have one memory that sticks out in particular was there was this giant tire. And I passed by and I said, everything was like a whiteout. It was covered in what looked like snow, but it was the dust, the crushed dust of the towers. But I always think back of this gigantic tire that seemed out of place. And it wasn't until months and months later that I realized that I saw a film that was the landing gear of the jet that had no place in this. So a lot of it is a blur. A lot of it I intentionally kind of put out of your head of some of the sights and the things that you had seen, but it was just like something out of a horror movie, devastation. I do remember I was a firefighter, and that is I am very proud to be a firefighter, but certainly not a chief officer from another state, from another city. And I remember working on the pile and having off-duty battalion chiefs from the New York Fire Department who were arriving, asking me, where should he go or what's happening. And so it just underscored for me the chaos that was happening that day. So I think we wound up, digging on the pile that entire day. We slept in a bread truck. The news, you'd start to hear names and who was there and who was potentially missing. And so that was the day. It was sights and sounds you probably put out of your head. It wasn't until probably the 14th anniversary of 9/11 because I actually took up the bagpipes in the wake of that. The FDNY pipes and drums were so taxed going to 3 and 4 and 5 funerals a day that they were having their own burnout. So there was a need. So every 9/11 since then, we would go, I'd either be at a mass or a memorial service. But once I retired, one 9/11, I made the mistake of staying home, and I just turned on the TV, and I don't know whether it was CNN or one of the cable shows showed a live reenact, like what had happened that day in real time, and it was every second and how the tower. And that was a mistake for me because it just, things that I had suppressed and put out of my mind just came back, and it screwed me up for a while. That was 14 years later. So I don't know what I'm giving you today, but a lot of the things that I try to focus on, all the beautiful things that have happened in the memory of those angels who who were my brother and sister firefighters and police officers and folks, moms and dads of so many people that we know were lost that day, and tried to do good in their name. But the day itself, I tried to, I maybe not a good thing, but I'm sure there's so many of us that it's difficult to remember and talk about. People say, "Oh, you were there," and the sense is, well, they want to talk about it. And that's kind of the last thing you want to do.
I'm just wondering, after you left as the head of the union, the fire department union statewide, you devoted your life to building these playgrounds all over the country that were named for victims of violence, starting with Sandy Hook. And I'm just wondering if this all started, if this recreation of your own life and the direction of your life was because of 9/11.
No question. Well, it was the worst day, the singular worst day in my memory. It gave birth to, I don't think I would be able to have done, like Where Angels Play wouldn't exist. So we looked to, so here's what happened after 9/11, we were navigating that. We got cards and letters from a third grade class from Mississippi. And that's because their teacher was the niece of one of our fire captains. So then 4.5 years later, their school was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina. So then it became a pay it forward that began with the horror and the tragedy. And in truth, it's like a triumph over tragedy. It's allowed us and positioned me to think about, how do we recover? How do we, in their name, have their lives lived on? So if the wonderful, beautiful lives that were lost at 9/11 did not occur, there wouldn't be a playground being built in the Indian reservation in South Dakota or in Central Africa where we were able to go, and all the beautiful angels of Sandy Hook, their legacy, and we kind of feel that as long as you talk about them, they're still here. I mean, you and I, one day will no longer be here, but they'll be talking about all the great things that Shelley Sunstein did for first responders, and Where Angels Play, and you hope that you leave something behind. So I think there's a lot of good, and I'm only one small little example of what the lives of 9/11 have meant to so many. I'm sure there's hundreds of foundations and charities that were created in their name, and that is the only thing that allows me to get up in the morning and try to make sense of it all, because it was a time, and I think that there's so many firefighters on the job today that weren't even born, or were 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years old, who were sheltered from knowing it, but they and I, we all stand on the shoulders of these heroes.
By the way, how many playgrounds have you now built around the world?
50. We're up to 55 playgrounds.
Huh.
Yeah, it was started in the wake of Sandy Hook Elementary School tragedy, and we've been to Puerto Rico, we've been to Canada. We were planning on this September 11th to cut a ribbon at the site of Wounded Knee, of Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, to pay it forward from our angels to, I don't know if you know Wounded Knee, but that was a horrible massacre that happened in 1890. So, and that is the poorest community in America. But, we try to look at why, so we're not able to do that. I had to just postpone it probably only a few days ago. But you reminded me that next year will be the 20th anniversary, and maybe it's even more appropriate that on that milestone, on the 20th anniversary, who knows, maybe we'll get some press that'll help us fund other playgrounds, because the American Indians are so wonderful, number one, but they're so downtrodden in many ways and are, have been forgotten. So it's led us in so many different ways. And not sure, I don't know whether I'm taking you far afield of the actual day, which is maybe on purpose because it's such a heart-wrenching day. But there was so much. I mean, right now we're going through what I would call a very slow, like maybe this is the 9/11 of this generation, this COVID-19, but it's done it's just a slow incremental way. But we remember 9/11 in the ways that the high school students who can't graduate or go to their prom will remember COVID-19, or, a grandmother or a loved one that was lost during this horrific time.
Do you think that you see life differently as a result?
No, no question. It's defined. I wouldn't say it's defined my life, but it's changed it in a way for the better. My mother's quote that I think I've hit you with this years ago, but she used to say that if you threw your problems into a pile with everyone else's, you would fight to get yours back. And events like this, for example, she's in town, but there's a mom of one of the Sandy Hook young angels is in town in New Jersey. We stay in touch with them. And she reminded me, she said, I know people are upset that their children can't graduate, or they can't go to you can't play their final year of basketball, or there's so many things that they're inconvenienced by. But she says, I wish I could remind them that my son will never graduate, will never have a prom, but at least at some point down the road that they will recover from that. She said, and once again, if they threw their problems into a pile. So everything is relative. Now, this is a mom who has two beautiful daughters, and she says, I think of the blessings that I have, even though I lost my son to this tragedy. So lessons continue every day. I mean, from 9/11, I was able to bring last month to Pine Ridge a picture of the raising of the American flag that a good friend of mine had recreated in oil paint. He's a great Chilean artist. And I gave that as a gift to the Pine Ridge, and was reminded that, so that's kind of emblematic and reminds folks of the Iwo Jima flag raising, which one of the Marines that raised that flag was a Native American, and the pride that they took in that. So we just continue to try to find those connections, and when things free up and allow us to get back to trying to bring joy to locations and hope and recovery to communities that need it, it will be because of 9/11. It'll be because of not because they were killed that day, but because the angels lived and continue to live on. So that's how at least we try to navigate what is such a difficult memory.
Thank you, Bill.
My pleasure.